Welcome to Legends of Data and AI. Each episode includes inspiring and actionable data and artificial intelligence insights from global leaders across industries. Your host, Dr. Usama Fayyad, was the first Chief Data Officer at Yahoo and is Chairman of Open Insights and Executive Director of the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of our Legends of Data and AI podcast. I'm Usama Fayyad, Chairman at Open Insights and Executive Director at the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University. And with me today is a very special guest, the Chief Data Officer at Prudential, Kjersten Moody. I've known her as kind of a leader in the world of data and analytics for a long time, starting when we first met in London, where she was running information analytics for Unilever. We worked together also when she was at Statefarm, where she was the Chief Data and Analytics Officer. So welcome, Kjersten.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
So let me start out by asking, with your experience in running analytics and data, and I would add the modifier running them well. There are very few groups, in my opinion, that are run effectively in several industries, especially consumer brands and insurance. Is there a big difference between the industry, or is it the same sort of challenges?
I think the answer is actually both. So where I've seen similar challenges is really in the underpinnings of technology. These large companies, multinational companies, tend to have a very expansive, heterogeneous technology estate, multiple platforms that are disconnected. And within each of these platforms, the data has really been engineered for the transaction. And it has created silos, it's created duplication, it's created, over time, a very heterogeneous data estate where that data is, as I said, designed for the transaction, not necessarily for the analytical or the artificial intelligence uses. And the talent that is within these organizations is very good, but it is talent that has the experience, the skills, the training to really manage a complex transactional environment, not necessarily a data or an AI-fueled type of ecosystem. So those beginning points have been common beginning points that I've seen. And where the differences actually start to become industry specific is in the use cases for AI. So what is the business intent for thinking about how to apply AI for business or digital transformation purposes? So philosophically, you see similar questions at the very top of how can I deploy AI effectively within my business? But very quickly, the what and the why starts to become industry specific. And that's really where there's a high degree of onus on data science teams, on business teams working with data scientists to really understand the industry so the orchestration of that transformation within the business is successful. And that tends to not just be industry specific, but business specific or process specific.
Indeed, and I think this whole transition from an economy of transactions to an economy of interactions has been a very subtle and difficult one in terms of thinking and approach for many of the established industries, as opposed to the new kind of born tech, born digital. What people remember a lot is usually stories, whether you're telling stories with data or whether you're explaining points with stories. So could you share a story or two on how, in your experience, AI and data science and analytics can make a big, if not huge, difference to the business?
Absolutely. So I think we have a spectacularly positive example here within Prudential, which was in our underwriting department. And it made a very big difference for the business but it was really in wonderful ways making positive differences for our customers. And I think that's what we're most proud of. So in the underwriting department, we were a typical insurer running approximately 22 days for an underwriting process. And in working very closely with the underwriting department through a business change program, we developed the models, developed the algorithms that allowed for accelerated or instant underwriting decisions. So from a customer experience perspective, we've been able to take experiences from 22 days down to a matter of minutes. And that is absolutely driven by the data science and the AI solutions that we delivered, but it was delivered within the business change program to be a differentiator in the underwriting within our industry. And that include evolved business processes. It includes the upskilling and the evolution of roles on both sides, within my own team, within the business's team in underwriting. And it's a mutually sort of achieved, co-created success that we're extremely proud of. And we hold it up as an example internally as we work across the businesses to say, here's a case study that as we look at this, we can learn from it and apply the lessons to the new opportunities that we're undertaking in different parts of the business.
Yeah, what an amazing story. And dropping from days or tens of days to seconds is not only
yes.
a huge improvement and a win for the customer, but also, imagine the big win for the business. All that
yes.
time and work that was happening during those days
yes.
is now not necessary, and people can focus on higher value stuff.
And that's exactly what happened. Actually, if I could just jump in there, that's exactly what happened. Is we're freeing a highly skilled underwriting department to really focus on the complex issues and cases that come to them, which again helps us to better serve our customers. So it's been a spectacular win all around, I think.
Exactly, wonderful. So in your opinion and experience, what are key issues that large enterprises have to think about in order to make AI work at a meaningful contribution to the business?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So I think there are 4 things that are sort of non-negotiables in the recipe for success. So the first is you need to have the level of sponsorship right. So this needs to be from a board of directors, C-suite, the very top of the house needs to embrace the activities of understanding how artificial intelligence will transform the business. And that essentially gives the business leaders direct or implied permission for transformation that is of a type or of a magnitude that hasn't historically been experienced. So the level of sponsorship, I think, is incredibly important. From there, it's how does an analytics organization engage back with the business within the context of the business strategy? So how are we taking the potential and the possibilities that data science and artificial intelligence open up for us and infusing that into the business strategy, as well as calling out explicitly in the business strategy the enablement of that? So it's not a thing off to the side that gets done off the side of somebody's desk, but it's actually infused in the strategy and therefore is being driven into the execution plans for the business. The third thing is the operating model. So there are many answers to an operating model, but it is an explicit question that needs to be asked and answered as part of this journey. So there's clarity on the roles, on the accountability, on the contributions that different parts of the organization are going to make to this transformation. And then the fourth part is thinking very critically about talent and the talent strategy. And this is not just data science roles, MLE roles, data engineering roles, but it's also the analytic upskilling within the business. It's working back with risk, privacy, security type functions. How are we really helping the people who ultimately need to engage in these strategies and in these roadmaps to have the right skills, to have the right mindset, to have that right culture that's enabled by the level of sponsorship to really embrace it and make it work. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So the key questions that need to be asked are ones that really get into how are senior leaders helping the organization in many ways change the fabric of how the organization or the business actually works.
Yeah, it's definitely a marathon, fully agree. And I love how you were able to kind of partition it into these different areas that we need to look into. And that transformation of explaining to a business that, hey, you're not really in the insurance business, you are, but you're really in the data business in a big way, much bigger way than you thought, is a big problem and issue. But what are the biggest issues standing in the way of making AI work, in your opinion? Is it a data dependency issue? Is it a question of business education opportunities? What comes to mind?
So I would actually take a step back from those examples and say the biggest issue that a large organization will have is not fully understanding the supply chain for artificial intelligence. Your data is a raw material, and you are producing outcomes, output that we call artificial intelligence. And there are steps that need to happen. Within those steps are processes. And especially in the first generation of these programs, each of those steps has been, the processes within them, the talent within them, has really been orchestrated for efficiency for a transactional world. And so if you can put sort of the supply chain to make your AI on paper, you can then start to understand where in that supply chain within the context of your particular business do you start to have inefficiencies in that production. And from there, engineer a companion program to the AI, which is really looking at fine-tuning the machine, the manufacturing, the how AI is produced. And you'll find your issues that need to be tackled. It might be talent, it might not be talent. It might be data, it might not be data. But almost certainly there is something there. And I think the right question to start to get underneath that is, well, what's my supply chain? And how am I doing in that manufacturing process of AI-driven transformation?
What a great and pertinent analogy for our times. The supply chain for
that's right, supply chain process, exactly.
And I love that analogy because it also sees if any part of your chain is weak, you're in trouble. So you got to think about it very seriously for robustness.
Exactly.
So speaking of that, how critical do you think, people, there's a lot of hype around AI, but how critical do you think AI is to the future of analytics in financial services?
It's existential.
I love that answer. I love that answer.
It's existential.
Now the question is, how long will it take the industry to understand that this is existential? I don't know.
Well, it's again, I think we'll only be able to quantitatively answer that question in retrospect. The day-to-day experience, though, is the awareness is there, the pull is there. The pull is not necessarily uniform from the different parts of the business, but having that C-suite sponsorship means that it's much easier to generate that pull. So the sense of urgency that somebody in my chair, for example, might feel, it makes for a much easier strategic conversation with a business P&L leader to say, all right, here, I'm here to help, really. I'm an enabler. And it's not a hostile takeover. It's not a scary thing. These are growth driving, efficiency driving, exciting opportunities to modernize and to compete more effectively. And that's just the truth of it, right? And those are fantastic conversations to be able to have. And I think, we're far enough along in understanding what AI is within sort of an industry, within a large business, that these are very believable, very real, very present conversations. And we're getting much faster to, all right, well, let's get busy and figure out what this really means for us.
Yeah. And I hope those comments are kind of a wake-up call, actually, to the industry as a whole. Now, to get AI to work right, which, if it's existential and so important, we know historically, at least in our experience, it's been that there's a big dependence on machine learning and data science because there's a lot more data. It's not really about a lot more algorithms. So, in your past experiences and your current one, how do you manage to get the right data at the right quality and the right granularity? Because data needed by humans is very different than data needed by algorithms and machines. How do you make sure it's available and reliable, etc.?
Yeah. So you have to think about, how do I answer that question? And then how do I answer that question at scale? So I'm going to answer your question with the at scale edition. Because it's easier to do if it's a point solution. It's like, well, I bring in a data engineer and but at scale, 1,000 times a day, right? How does this happen? And it really gets into two critical pieces that need to be looked after. The first is the operating model for a data and analytics organization. And the second is the delivery methodology and the way we construct teams. So at Prudential, for example, I have established the operating model in my department is using Hub and Spoke. So Hub is really looking after the enablement of data and those core data platforms where the analytical data resides and is instantly available for analytical uses. The Spoke teams are working back with the business to use that data for some type of business transformational purpose. So that's the operating model. So I have accountability at the beginning of my supply chain with data, and I have accountability in the production of the AI sort of outcome. And I can make sure that there is always and every day a very clear handshake in the different steps of that supply chain. And then the way that we construct the teams then, so if you only do operating model, you only have half the answer. So it's how do you build the team? And the team is by design cross-functional in nature. So I'm putting data engineers next to a data scientist, next to an MLE. We have our cloud platform engineers are tightly aligned into the roadmap for the data science teams. And so we're able to, as part of the data modernization, data transformation program, understand what our scope is based on the data science and the AI programs. And we're getting to the point now where we can front run on the data and the enablement of data, the portfolio for the use of that data. So it's really operating model and then sort of agile team design. And you need to make sure that you're putting the right skills next to each other. So you don't have to open a ticket to get a data set. You don't have to sort of rely on a transactional infrastructure to extract and massage data for the analytical purposes. That's really embedded into the fabric of delivery and made accountable through the operating model.
Yeah, that co-location and communication and rapid feedback and brainstorming, very, very important. Sometimes
Absolutely.
really
Yep.
You have silos. So let me ask a couple of quick questions and then kind of move to the wrap up this amazing discussion. Responsible AI and dealing with ethical issues in AI is getting a lot of attention, especially in financial services. Few out there understand kind of what does it mean to do responsible AI. There's few individuals who are trained to understand even what to do about responsible AI. even educational institutions don't know what to train people on to do responsible AI. So yet the issues are there. So what's an enterprise to do in this environment? Like, how do you tackle this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing we have to do is recognize that within the industry, it's a mix of familiar issues, but that need new solutions to meet the need. And then sort of new either nuances or new questions that are introduced as we start to change the balance within a process from a different balance between the human contributions and the technical or the AI contributions to it. So the first thing is to say, non-negotiable. We own this issue, and we will work manually if we need to with the law department, the privacy departments, the risk departments to really inspect and to understand. So there's a cultural component to this that needs to be infused from leadership on down to say that the right thing to do is to ask the question. And here's the expertise community that can help you to answer that. And then as you sort of think about the platforms, the enablement of data science, the modernization of both the data as well as the modeling, the sort of the AI platforms there, really having as embedded into the scope, into the fabric of these platforms, thinking through and asking the questions, what does ethics by design look like? What does privacy, risk, security, monitoring, all by design, what does that look like as part of just the scope or the requirements of, I need to host a model, what do I need to make that happen? With a very keen eye towards, if we don't know how it's done, you need to default to asking. And if computationally we're not sure how to solve it, you need to be working with people who can put eyes on it. So hand on heart, every day of the week, all year long, you can say that we have done our best by this, and recognizing that up front, it's more of a brute force solution, while some of the more sophisticated technical people changes are under construction.
And human in the loop is so necessary to kind of avoid the big disasters that could come out. Let me, if we can spend like a very quick minute or two, much is talked about in terms of the new fintechs and how fintechs are changing the world of financial services. In particular, in your view, in the world of insurance, how do you view the threat from fintechs or so-called insurtechs to the established kind of big insurance players?
Absolutely. It's a threat. And personally, I think about using the word opportunity. If you see a problem or a threat on the horizon, run towards it. So we're actively looking to engage and understand and partner, bring into kind of the baseline of how we think and how we operate with a number of different external stimuli, including the fintech and the insurtech sort of emerging industries.
What a great counterintuitive advice. I love it. If you see a threat on the horizon, run towards it and embrace and figure out what it means for you. So what advice do you have for companies, large enterprises or new startups, in terms of, how should they be thinking about AI? And let me also combine it with, in your experience, what is missing in the world of AI and data that would make it more of a mainstream activity so that all sorts of companies can benefit from it on a routine basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think companies need to begin with the question of how are we using these new techniques for the benefit of our customers and for our employees, right? You need to start from that frame because that gets you into a transformative, positive frame of mind, and it sort of makes it a little bit less scary and threatening, right? We're doing something for good. rather than something that, is potentially harmful. And then to make it more mainstream, it's the word that comes to mind is courage. This is change, and it's a type of change that may not have been experienced by leaders. And yet, as we look at the world around us, as we exist as consumers in our own digital spheres, we can intuitively understand, we can instinctively understand that this change is happening. And within our own business frame, to some degree, it is necessary. But the first step, the first program, the first major change requires fortitude. It requires courage. And I think, I'll get back to the sponsorship remarks. That is such an important role that senior leaders take, which is to help the organization with the courage and to provision the talent to execute wisely in what is a courageous first step. So it's less of a technical answer, but I think, the advice on sort of getting started, what's missing, it's perhaps more of the EQ business skills in this would be helpful.
Yeah, as you often do, Kjersten, I did not expect that answer. Courage actually, it's a great ingredient because the data actually supports what you're saying. The companies, the organizations, and even the countries who have done well with AI are the ones that kind of embraced and started doing and tried to change, and suddenly they discover, wow, this stuff is valuable. Exactly. As a wrap up, and this being kind of the end of a calendar year, the start of a new one, I'll ask you our last parting question, which is, as you look out there, what's big for you in the next year, and what's your big prediction as to what's going to be important here for AI and for data?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, looking ahead to next year, for myself personally, it's really around scale. I think we've built a very strong platform with a very nice inventory of success stories, and really partnering across the organization to help both raise the floor and lift the ceiling. And I think the big topic, the one that we're working on this year, no doubt about it, but next year I think will be kind of a breakthrough year for us, is the by design and at scale implementation of ethical AI frameworks. So in no way do I suggest that we're at risk today, because we're in the brute force mode, and we insist upon that. But how we start to think about, again, that supply chain and brute force will become a bottleneck. So how do we start to retool and get better in doing so as we scale the implementation across the organization?
Kjersten Moody, Chief Data Officer at Prudential, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with our audience. I ask everyone to tune in for our next episode following this exciting and probably a highlight episode for me, with a lot of unexpected answers. So thank you so much.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Legends of Data and AI. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of data and AI. If you're keen to learn more about making data and AI work in the real world and in any organization, join us next episode and subscribe to the podcast. As always, you can head over to open-insights.com to sign up for our email list, learn more about the work we do, and have access to data resources. See you on the next podcast.